Hi, Anne.
Hi, Peter.
Welcome to the podcast on everyday metallurgy.
Thank you. And thank you for inviting me. I've looked forward to be able to talk about my history.
Thank you. I'm also looking forward to. You are an expert within anodizing of aluminium. And in fact, the reason why you are invited is that you are the first who were recommended by one of my followers.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a big honor.
Yeah, big honor. Yeah, I'm really happy.
Yeah.
I made an impression there.
Yeah. But first, will you introduce yourself, your name, what you do?
Yeah. My name is Anne Deacon Juhl, and I'm working with anodizing every day and have done that for 25 years now. I have my own consultant company, AluConsult, where mostly almost 100% nowadays. I'm helping companies with anodizing issues. So it can be anodizing companies, the companies who are actually producing the anodized aluminum. So having aluminum coming into their facility, anodize it and send it out to their customer, or what I call end users, who are the companies who are using anodized aluminum in their products. So they are not doing the anodizing, but they are, for example, designing it or building it or assembling it or
putting up the
machining
specification for it.
Yeah. So you can say when I started after doing my PhD in pulse anodizing, I thought all my customers would be anodizers, the company who are doing the anodizing. But then probably 75% of all my customers are the end users, the people who have issues with the anodized aluminum. So I'm kind of trying to help the world being better to anodizing the companies. So all the people, the end users, are happy when they receive the anodized parts.
Okay, perfect. I also love to hear about people's background because until now, everybody I've talked to, when they were 18, they did not know that they were going to be metallurgists. So the route to become a metallurgist is not one way. It's one individual way for each person. So what is your route? What made your decision point?
Yeah, and I think that you will hear exactly the same, that I never thought about being a metallurgist. I started with chemistry, so I'm a chemical engineer. So I really didn't like organic chemistry or bioorganic chemistry, where you have to sit there and count all the dots. So I was more into the more inorganic chemistry, and started to have a couple of metallurgy for beginners, some of the courses at the technical university at that time, and some of the very good what is it called, the people who, the educators, the lecturers, the professors who had the presentations. They were all great, and some of them actually had us sing in the morning. So I'm kind of was starting to get into that direction. And then I did, my master was about corrosion. So it was in corrosion, actually corrosion by titration. So we were measuring the corrosion by titrating with the acid. So measuring the H plus, seeing every time one H plus were used, one corroded metal iron was out in the solution with the Gregers Beck Nielsen. And one of the materials there was aluminum. And I kind of got you could say, well, hogging on that. After my master, I was invited to, hired to do work in the Center for Advanced Galvanotechnique at that time. Per Møller was he was the manager of that group, and then there were a possibility to do a PhD about pulse anodizing, and it was a lot about the chemistry. So still, I knew it was on aluminum, but it was mostly about the chemistry in the process tank, the galvanic process tanks or anodizing tanks. But really, probably in about a month into my study, like PhD, it turned out that I had got 3 different aluminum alloys, and they didn't behave the same when I did the anodizing. So suddenly I had to start digging into even more, not only looking into metallurgy, the very small part in the book about metallurgy at the Technical University at that time about aluminum, but I had to really dig deep into the aluminum material, the processes like extrusion and casting, and all that, because of the metallurgy of the aluminum is extremely and detrimental if you don't know it when you do anodizing. So being a chemist and thought that was my main PhD, it actually ended out that I had to do a lot of cross sections to figure out why the heck did it end up like this, and so I think my PhD was the place where I definitely got the feeling that metallurgy is more important than you think.
You have already opened up for some of this technical stuff, but it's a good bridge to my question now, because as I understand anodizing, you have, when you work with aluminium, you have a passive layer of an oxide film. But when you anodize, you enhance this film, or you enlarge it in thickness. But can you describe a little deeper what is happening when you do that?
Yeah, it's actually, anodizing is an artificial corrosion process which we control by applying a current. The aluminum is the anode in the process, so it's the thing we actually want to corrode, because when it starts corroding, it creates this oxide film on the surface, which, as you say, natural form. But when we apply this current, we can create a thicker oxide layer, and in that way, by having it in electrolyte, which, for example, is 75% of all anodizing is happening in sulfuric acid, and this sulfuric acid has a chemical reaction to the surface. Also, the aluminum oxide is actually chemical dissolved, and because you apply a current, which you increase the oxide layer, and at the same time you are immersed into a sulfuric acid solution which dissolve chemically, then you create this pore structure, which is different from the oxide film you see, which are natural form, which is actually a compact oxide film, which doesn't have this porosity. And this porosity is the whole, you can say, the main attraction of the oxide, the anodizing process, because this porous structure can be used for coloring, for gluing, different type of adhesion, for paint adhesion and things like that. But it actually also gives you, depending on how the structure is, it gives you the hardness and wear resistant, the corrosion resistant. So you get a lot of possibility to play around with this process, so you can create your specific, unique surface for your specific, unique application. You can hear that I love it.
Yeah. So you said now coloration, but does it also enhance corrosion resistance? Does it change the surface properties? What about hardness or wear resistance? Can you talk a little about that?
Yeah, so this pore structure, as I said, it's possible to color it, but when you seal it, you actually close this pore structure, and by this you increase the corrosion resistance, so it should at least withstand thousands or 3,000 hours in neutral salt spray without seeing any pits at all. So this is the corrosion resistant, and by changing a little bit in the sulfuric acid in the electrolyte, by cooling it down, you can do hard anodizing, because then you will have a less porous structure. You will have more of the aluminum oxide, which the aluminum oxide is actually the hard part. It is as hard as almost as hard as diamond. So by this aluminum oxide, creating this to a thick layer, we are talking about layers for conventional anodizing. When you do the coloring and sealing, it's 20-25 microns, whereas in hard anodizing, you're doing much thicker layer. It could be 15 microns or even more, depending on what your specific wear, for example, how long time you would like to have it withstand and things like that.
So the wear resistant parts, where are they typically used?
It's used in brakes and hydraulic systems. You can, for example, if you are doing mountain biking, then the what is it called? The front fork.
Yeah, where you attach the wheel.
Yeah. It actually, most of them are hard anodized because there are friction inside that tube. But it can also be you would like to do hard anodizing because you would like to do subsea materials or parts. So have a very high corrosion resistant by a thicker oxide layer. So this oxide layer, and that's the reason why the natural formed oxide layer also has a protection, as we were talking about, as you were mentioning. It's like corroding a copper roof, or it's a stable oxide layer, which you can say rebuild, because immediately when there are fresh aluminum surface, the oxygen in the air will create the oxide layer. So even though you get a scratch in something, some parts, you will still have the minimum protection as the aluminum normally do.
Yeah. Then if I look into the details of it, I'm guessing that the little structure you have just above your head, this honeycomb structure, that is how it looks.
Yeah, the honeycomb from the Elconsult logo. Yes, that's the honeycomb structure, because the honeycomb structure is probably the strongest structure, one of the strongest structure in the world, not only for aluminum oxide, but also, from B-cube, honeycomb structure. Yeah. So this honeycomb structure is really, really strong. So it doesn't have to have very, very thick walls to be a very, very strong structure. Yeah. So.
Yeah, but that's how the anodizing layer looks.
Yeah, it's sulfuric acid.
And the porosities where you insert, where are they positioned?
They are positioned in the middle of these hexagonal structure. So it's like a tube inside the hexagonal structure. So which makes it the reason why I'm saying it's like you can use it to fill with color. You can use it as adhesion and other thing.
Yeah. What size are these tubes?
Tubes.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, they are in nanometers, so they are really small, and that is one of the reasons why we don't see white anodized aluminum, because the white pigment is too big to actually be immersed into these pores. So a lot of, if you can do white anodizing, you have a very good business case.
Okay. Yeah. I'm not sure I understand why you can see the color, because if it's just a little spot, is it transparent?
But you color the whole surface, you can say. So it's the whole surface, and the aluminum oxide, I haven't said that, is actually transparent. So the aluminum oxide, so you can actually see the color through the coating. And that is also the reason why the metallurgy is so important for aluminum, because this transparency shows the underneath material, the microstructure of the aluminum. And if you have, for example, a casting with lots of silicon in, you will immediately see a dark and patchy white surface, because the aluminum oxide is so transparent.
So what can you can also anodize other materials? Can you do it with stainless steel, because it also has an oxide layer, or titanium? How does it work?
You have to have a valve material, so you have to have one of those material which has a extra electron in their outer. Okay, now we are getting into old knowledge, but
an orbital.
Yeah. So the oxide film form of these valves are stable, whereas, for example, on stainless steel, it's not stable. It's like rust. So you corrode the surface, you create iron oxide, but it's not stable. Whereas in aluminum and in anodizing, you're creating aluminum oxide, and aluminum oxide is stable. So the whole process for anodizing is actually an electrochemical conversion of part of the aluminum into aluminum oxide. So the adherence between the aluminum and the aluminum oxide they are interconnected. So it's not like if you put paint on top of aluminum, you will have kind of aluminum and then put paint on top. So you need to make sure there is a good adhesion there, but the aluminum is converting, the anodizing is converting, electrochemical convert the surface into aluminum oxide. And again, that's the reason why metallurgy is so important, because you can see if you do a corrosion process as anodizing, artificial corrosion process, and your current is meeting aluminum, and in another place you are meeting copper aluminum intermetallic, or a silicide, or so the whole surface needs to be as homogeneous and as easy to anodize as possible to get an even oxide layer in the end.
So you are able to anodize titanium.
Oh, sorry. Back to titanium. Yeah. You are able to anodize titanium, but titanium, the oxide layer on titanium are very thin, and they kind of behave a little different. I don't know if your glasses is a titanium glasses, but you can actually change the color by different voltage in the anodizing process on titanium.
So it's the interference with the light.
Yeah.
That makes the color.
Yeah. And you can actually do this interference anodizing also with aluminum. If you, again, go back to metallurgy in the aluminum. So if you are having one of those aluminum alloys, which has, for example, a little high amount of chromium in the alloying element, you will have a more yellowish color of the surface appearance after anodizing. It's not as distinct as it is with titanium, because the titanium has this very thin oxide layer compared to the aluminum oxide.
Yeah. Then you said something about different ways of producing the aluminium also affects the possibility to anodize. So is there a difference between casted aluminium and extruded aluminium?
Yeah, the cast aluminum is often a very high silicon containing aluminum alloy, because silicon is really, really good when you like to cast aluminum parts. When you like to cast it thin dimensions and thick dimensions, the castability is really good for the aluminum silicon alloys. And the silicon has this tendency to be found in the grain boundaries, and sometimes it's actually needle-like, and you can see when you start anodizing these oxide film and you create a cross-section, you can you can see the microstructure you have anodized in the aluminum oxide layer in this cross-section. Okay. So it's really good, but it's not very beautiful, and that's the reason why mostly the cast aluminum are used for cars, as an automotive industry are using it a lot, where it, under the hood, so it actually doesn't matter how it looks. Yeah. If you do the extrusion, it's more like for the 6000 alloys, which are aluminum silicon also, but where the cast aluminum is 8 to 12% silicon mostly. Then the extruded alloys are between 0.5 and 1.5 silicon. So really low content of silicon, which course you can say connect with the magnesium in this alloy also. And this magnesium silicide has great influence on also extrudability, and also afterwards the formability and other things when you do machining afterwards. But often you like to put some copper in, or something to make, when you do machining afterwards, you like to be able to do it as fast as possible. We all like to do things fast, and some of this can influence, because now you create a microstructure which is not as homogeneous as it has to be. So now you increase the possibility, at least, to have some failures when you do the anodizing of those parts. So I'm kind of really working hard to talk about the metallurgical history of the part before you start anodizing, because all the history, all the things, all the heating and cooling, which has been exposed to the top layer of the surface of aluminum, will immediately be seen in the anodizing process, and the result sometimes not as good as you want to see.
I was looking at your background when you talked about this needle. Is that
it's the needle. That is actually a scanning electron microscope image of a aluminum silicon with 7% silicon in, and you can see the needles. So that is one of my favorite things to show.
I like it.
Yeah.
Then what about surface roughness? Because you create a quite smooth surface, but what if you have a rough machined surface? Can you anodize that equally, or do you have to polish it first?
If you have a rough surface before anodizing, you will have an even rougher surface after anodizing, because anodizing just kind of making it more rough. It's convert the surface into aluminum oxide, and the aluminum oxide is a little bit more voluminous
than it
expands. Compared to the aluminum. So it will kind of just follow the roughness of the surface, and it expands because of the aluminum oxide is more volumes, and then you see a higher roughness if you don't do anything before. So you can say for hardness, for hard anodizing, up to 2 to 3 times you can increase the roughness if you have, for example, 50 microns. So that's a lot. Something to think about if, again, we are talking about these high and hard anodized parts are often for technical application, and we don't like to have a rough surface if we have some kind of abrasion. So definitely something to look into. But there are some pre-treatments and mechanical pre-treatments, both chemical and mechanical, you can do before. So you can smoothen out the surface. So you
like a chemical polishing?
Yeah, chemical polishing is one of the possibilities. And this will smoothen out the surface. So in that way you get a bright surface, but you also get a less rough surface afterwards. Yeah. But it's some of the things you can play with, and that's the beauty of this, that the aluminum is easy to chemical and also mechanically to change the surface on. So because it's soft and all these things, you have the possibility to do it before, but also because it's so active in the chemistry, you can do a lot of interesting things in the chemistry, both before and after the aluminum oxide.
You said it was expanding. I also imagine that the thermal expansion of the oxide layer is quite different compared to the metal.
Yeah.
But do you see cracks if it becomes too big, or do you advise not to change temperatures too much, or how is it?
Yeah, the aluminum oxide has, you can say that if we start with the corrosion, because that's kind of interesting in the question you also ask with. Aluminum can, if you are between 5 pH 5 to 9.5, nothing will happen with aluminum. When you do the anodizing and you have the aluminum oxide, you maybe expand the pH range a little, but it's not a lot. So the only thing you actually do is postpone the oxide, not the oxide, the corrosion. So by increasing the thickness of this layer, you will have a longer lifetime. But this layer has also the tendency, as you say, because there are thermal expansion coefficient between the aluminum, difference between the aluminum and the aluminum oxide, you will see cracks. You can see cracks. But as long as you keep below 100, 120 degrees Celsius, it's not that prone to crack. Hard anodizing, because thicker layer, as you say, are more prone to crack. But again, if you talk with your anodizer, they can actually work with the process, so they create a more, you can say, ductile
elastic
oxide layer, because the oxide layer, the aluminum oxide, is a crystal structure. So of course it's brittle in the end. So if you in any way can do this more, so you lose the brittleness, then you will also see a less cracking. And most of the times these cracks, we call them actually tracing, because it's only in the top layer of the oxide film. So it's not changing anything in the corrosion performance.
Okay. It doesn't introduce pits. It's not like pre-pitting or crevices.
No, it's not. The reason for pits are more the metallurgy, the microstructure, where you actually have cracks in the oxide layer, because underneath, when we start anodizing, there were some copper aluminum intermetallic phases which didn't want to be anodized. There you see cracks. But these thermal expansions are often crazing and only in the top layer, and they are really also very dependent on humidity. So sometimes I come out to customers saying, oh, we have all these cracks. And then when I come, maybe next day it's rainy and you know, there are no cracks at all. So the oxide layer actually works with the humidity also. Yeah.
You just mentioned that impurities could affect it in the metal. I thought that typically if you have impurities, I think if you have iron impurities in the in aluminium, it has a miscoloration. But you just said that it also can change the corrosion properties.
Yeah.
So what are the impurities you have to be very much aware of in your alloys?
Yeah, the impurities are mostly the copper when you talk about corrosion. So the copper is really not a very good alloying element to put in. But if you like to machine it and have a high strength aluminum alloy, you would like to put copper in.
Yeah.
So therefore,
is it because copper is precipitation hardening, or
exactly,
it's small nodules that breaks
and these small nodules are wonderful because it strengthens the aluminum. It makes it easier to machine, and as long as these small nodules are homogeneously distributed across the surface, you can actually, by again telling you anodizer that you have this 2000 series, the copper aluminum alloy, they can process it well enough so you get a okay oxide layer, but it will never be as good as if you are choosing a 5000, the aluminum magnesium alloy, or a 6000, the aluminum silicon magnesium alloy. So it's not the best when you talk about corrosion. So so definitely something to think about if corrosion is also a issue or property or something your product is exposed to.
So the worst kind of impurity, that's copper, but what else can be can give you troubles as an anodizer?
So as you mentioned, iron definitely something which makes the appearance worse. So it's not. I think that is really something I'm trying to sell. That if you look at the aluminum and the anodized aluminum as a for example, a surface, when you look at the surface of a wooden plank or a wooden table, then it's okay. There are color difference. You think it looks beautiful,
it's
but
a nice
when
pattern.
we look into and the variation. So, for example, if you look at the Opera House, the top tower of the Opera House, there are huge aluminum plates anodized, and there are variation in those. But why not say it's beautiful instead of wanted it to be like really uniform, the same color? If you want same color, do paint. If you want anodizing and the same color, you can do it, but it's really expensive. You have to pay more money for it than you maybe want to. And sometimes this is an issue. But I also think that what I wanted to say, different alloying elements definitely gives different appearance. But if everything else is equal, so if you have the right microstructure, the same microstructure each time, maybe they are more grayish, but then they will all be more grayish. The problem is if the metallurgical history is not stable, so what you have been doing before you do the anodizing, if that has a variation, you will see a variation in the anodizing. So we actually, I think we throw out a lot of things or as I call it, a defect and have to re-anodize or redo, and that is expensive, and maybe it's not necessary in the end. I'm talking about the recyclability,
nice.
and sustainability. So yeah, of course we want to look nice, but if the property, so it can work, but it doesn't look the same, can you live with it? Yeah.
Now we're getting close to the end, but I would like to learn a little more about where do you see as a normal person, where do you see anodized aluminium in your daily life? So how can I relate to it?
Yeah, you can relate to it in the way that you see it. If you have an iPhone, that will be an anodized aluminum case on the bottom. Your MacBook, if you have a MacBook, that will also be one. So often in these high tech things, aluminum are used because it's light and it's beautiful, it's easy to handle, it's also kind of a cheap material, it's recyclable, so often there. But you can also see them, when you are driving on the highway, so all the for noise reduction, they are often also made of huge aluminum profiles, maybe with glass in it and things. And then most of it's not anodized, but there are a lot of aluminum in your car, but also anodized frames for your pictures, so photo frames, and you have pots and pans made of aluminum, tents, for when you are hiking, when you are climbing. There are also, so everywhere. In the airplanes, of course, a lot of aluminum because it's light. In the ferries, so when you do the sail, when you do the trip from Zealand to Jutland, you will be in an aluminum ferry. So bridges, so all over the place.
Yeah. Fantastic. So the world is running because of anodized aluminium.
Definitely, and there should be more anodized aluminum because, as I'm saying, it is definitely a recyclable material, the aluminum, and the anodizing on the aluminum, it's only aluminum oxide, as we have talked about, and aluminum oxide can be remelted without any problem, whereas if you use paint aluminum, you have to remove the paint before you remelt it. Yeah.
And
so
it's lifetime expanding.
To
have a number, is it doubling lifetime or more?
The anodizing? No, more than double. So you will not, if you have, and we are talking again about appearance, then you will see 10 to 25 years definitely on conventional anodizing, up to more than 25 years on buildings. So definitely increase the lifetime of the product. You can say that by one of the problems, because aluminum are so sustainable, you can say, are having such a long lifetime. Right now, we actually see a problem with people who want to have recycled material, because most of the aluminum which is out there is 75 years old. Not most of it, but so it doesn't come back fast enough compared to what we would like to have, the recycled parts. So it's very important not only to look at the recycle, but also when you buy primary aluminum, there are two different ways. You can say you can create it by primary production, which is really it's expensive energy-wise. So that's the reason why we do the recycle. But when we don't get enough recycled material, then you have to look into the primary production, which some of them are doing, for example, with the water energy or solar energy instead of coal. So that is how to look at its sustainability.
Thank you, Anne. I learned a lot.
Good.
You were able to answer all my questions, even the deeper technical ones. So
I'm glad. I'm glad.
I'm pretty amazed.
Good. I'm glad.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I hope that people will follow this and come back to you if they want to learn even more on analyzing.
Yeah. Thank you. They should be welcome. And thank you again for inviting me. And, at 45 minutes is not enough to talk about anodizing. So we should have, we will do it again, maybe. A follow-up. Okay.
I loved it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. You're welcome. Have a great day, Peter. Bye.
Yeah, you too. Bye.